Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to get started. We're going to get started because we have a lot to do today. As school systems around the county are shrinking, our school system is growing. However, this wonderful sign of community vitality comes with challenges, and we're going to find out about those today. However, first, we entertain any announcements from anyone, from any of the organizations. Is there anybody that has an announcement to make? Mary Lee?
The Human Rights Committee proudly announces Charles Blow comes on January the 7th at the Homage School, 2:30 in the afternoon. Charles Blow at the New York Times will come and just be here for that event. Please, all welcome and no charge, but you might better get a bit early.
Thank you. Anything else? Keith?
Even though she's small in stature, and if I were to tell her to stand up, she would look like she's not standing up. But we love her. I'm talking about you. Okay. Proud, very proud. Irish Freed. She's not a member of the summit, but her and her husband, Dr. Freed, have come to every meeting. She's the founder of Hope Community Kitchen. She was she was top honoree. She was the top honoree for the 35th luncheon for the seniors. She's in the Hall of Fame of Westchester County. Okay? Please to you, Iris.
Seniors are recognized when they retire. They all volunteer. This organization, this is the 35th year I have ever heard of it. One of my volunteers nominated me.
Well, we know you.
Wonderful. We all know you and love you. Thank you, Iris, and thank you for being a loyal attendee as well. Jeff is out of town, so we will not have our tidbits, but we will proceed with the program, and I'm going to turn that over to Lynette.
Good morning. So I'm just going to, many of you are familiar with Dr. Shaps, our superintendent of schools, but I will just provide a brief introduction. This is Dr. Shaps' 15th year serving as superintendent, and actually his 8th as superintendent of the Mamaroneck Public Schools. In fact, probably one of the things I'm most proud of when I served on the board was hiring him. During his tenure, Dr. Shaps has worked hard to continuously improve the quality of Mamaroneck's educational programs while limiting the budget's growth from year to year. While enrollment has grown significantly during Dr. Shaps' tenure, 13% since 2010, per pupil expenditures have remained relatively flat during this time. In recent years, the district has infused technology as a key component in its vision for teaching and learning. And you've heard about this if you've been to some of our other programs. Enabling students in the youngest grades to develop the technological and information literacy that are necessary in today's information age. Prior to coming to Mamaroneck, Dr. Shaps served 4 years as superintendent in Hastings on Hudson and 3 years as superintendent of Manchester Essex Regional School District in Manchester by the Sea, Massachusetts. He has had extensive experience at the secondary level as well, having served as principal of Manchester Essex Regional School District's middle and high school, and as assistant principal at Londonderry High School in New Hampshire. Dr. Shaps grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and graduated from Scarsdale High School. He and his wife, Kathy, have 4 children and 2 grandchildren. And the topic today is of great interest to everyone in the community. Whether or not you have children in the schools, the district's solution to the increasing enrollment is likely to have some impact on you. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shaps. There will be plenty of time for questions at the end as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynette, for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, and it's a pleasure. Oh, I'm sorry.
Easier for people to back.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to. I'm usually accompanied by other superintendents or districts folk, but I'm glad to be here today. First of all, happy holidays to everyone. I hope it's a wonderful holiday season for all of you, and certainly a happy and healthy new year. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about our school system, which in many respects is a reflection of the support of our community for public education. And we feel in many respects this is a true partnership. Before I begin, I just want to recognize we have two members of our Board of Education. Rena Beater, Board Trustee, is here, and Sari Winter as well. If you could just say hello. And our Director of Communications, Debbie Minette, is here as well. So thank you. As Lynette suggested, the topic for this morning is to be about our public schools, but generally our system challenge of both growing enrollment and I would say space, because I want to make it clear. Enrollment by itself, that is students coming and going, happens every day. We have students who surprise us and relocate to our school system, and then we have similarly students who leave for various reasons. So we always look at enrollment and consider from a budgetary perspective, how are we going to make room for and educate all children. Where the challenge begins for us is to understand where we're going to put all the kids who come here, and how do we plan for that accordingly. And many of you who went, I imagine, through the public school system can harken back to the time when you were a student. And I want to give you a perspective, because in Murray Avenue School, and I think in 1968, because I actually found this the other day, there were over 800 students in the school. And so it's hard to say today, when we have 750, what's the big deal, right? Where's the problem? Why can't we just educate kids as they come? But we've gone through a number of transformations in education, and there's transformations in how we educate students, the programs we offer, the needs of students, and so it's changed dramatically, and I'll talk about the implications of that as we go along. So let me set the stage. School systems like to plan, and we like to plan well in advance, and so in 2010, the Board of Education went forward with a demographic study, and typically these studies are 10 to 15 years at a time, because we really want to understand the arc or where we head around enrollment. And interesting enough, when I read the 2010 or 2011 demographic study, it suggested, very similar to other school systems in Westchester in general and Rockland, that we would see a steady decline in the number of kindergarten students. And so year after year, our elementary schools would actually see a declining enrollment. We were scheduled to have peak enrollment in 2018, this year, which is interesting. As less students enter the system each year, we knew that our bubble of students would come through the system, going up through the system into high school. And the projection for this year was that we would have 5,112 kindergarten through grade 12 students. So here we are today, and we began our school year on September 1st with 5,607 students. So almost 650 students more than what we anticipated at this year, at this point in time. And so we're trying to figure out, how did this happen? What caused this, and what's going to happen next? Well, there are a couple things to point out. First of all, the phenomenon of what we believe is the collapse of the economy, and then in some ways the rebirth, or the years of 2010 through, or 11 through today, is that we've seen a recovery of the housing market, and that as many people have decided to retire based on the reputation of the school system, certainly the quality of our programs, we've seen a lot of new families come into the system. Okay, so that's the first point I want to make. We are, for the first time in the last 3 years, we have welcomed a higher percentage of new families, first-time families to the school system. That is an unusual trend over the last 6 years. So that is one remarkable difference that we didn't anticipate. The second thing I just want to mention is that, and Lynette suggested, or Sandra suggested, that our surrounding districts are not necessarily experiencing the same phenomenon. In northern Westchester, they're losing a significant number of students. The Chappaqua, the Byram Hills. Byram Hills has lost 10% of their enrollment in the last 4 years. The Yorktowns, the Katona-Lewisburg, that closed an elementary school. So in northern Westchester, you're seeing a steady decline of enrollment. In Scarsdale, it's roughly, over the last 4 years, there's been, I think, a net loss of 46 students, while over the last 4 years, we've seen a growth of 451 students over what was expected. So you have to start to say, what's coming next, right? And so 3 years ago, when we met in the summer during our board summer workshop, we started talking about system challenges. And if you've heard me talk here before, one of our system challenges, but also I would say is our strength, is the sense of diversity, but certainly the performance of students in poverty, students of color, has been something that we've really tried to focus on over the last several years. At the same time, the board started to learn about the growing trend of increased annual enrollment. And we started to say, what happens if this continues? Because we weren't sure 4 years ago of what today would bring. That is, we thought maybe this is just an unusual anomaly, right? A one-time situation. But then we started to welcome kindergarten classes over the last 3 years that were well above 450 students. So then we got worried, okay? Because we were losing class sizes of 325 and we were gaining kindergarten students above 440 to 150. And so we started to do our own predictive models to anticipate and prepare ourselves for the enrollment increase that we believe is starting to become a trend. At the same time, as I mentioned, enrollment is not necessarily a problem, but it is a problem when you talk about resources and budgets. And so as these classes were growing and coming into the system, we recognized that this was going to have and will continue to have a lasting impact on our middle school and our high school. So to give you a perspective, in 2010 there were 1,050 students in Homix Middle School. Today there are over 1,300 students. All right. At the high school, when I began, there were 1,444 students in 2010. We're now over 1,600 students and growing. And so we project that if this trend continues, in 2021, we're going to be well over 6,000 students in the district. And that is a tremendous growth. Our fourth grade cohort, which is an unusual cohort, is 485 students. So as those students go through the middle school in 2 years and then the high school, we're going to feel the pains. And as I suggested, it's going to directly impact in a tax cap environment our ability to apply resources to educate more students, which require more staff in order to maintain the breadth of programs that we have to offer students. So why is this such a big problem? Going back to the issue, the second dimension of space. So as you know, if you're a product of the school system or if you had children in the schools, our elementary model is built on neighborhood schools, right? You buy a house or you rent within a proximity of a zone school with the expectation of having a neighborhood school experience. Well, the problem with that is when you look at our class size guidelines, if you look at the enrollment and you think about how many classrooms we have, we start to have a problem at some of our schools as we grow faster than we can accommodate space. That is, right now in Murray Avenue School in Chatsworth, we are essentially out of classrooms. That based on our class size guidelines, the expectations that we have, the number of students per class, the number of classroom spaces, we are at full capacity. So the dimension of learning space, when you combine that with higher enrollment, creates what I would say a system challenge. So that's important to point out. And so I wanted to give you a full understanding of where all of our schools are at the elementary level, because it speaks to what I would say is a universal issue and not specific to one particular school. So we are, as I said, at Murray and Chatsworth at a point where we have no additional classrooms to open up for more students. At Mamaroneck Avenue School, we've actually seen an increase of similarly about 125 students. However, of the 125 additional students in growth that is now in the 700 plus range, 40 of those students are actually students who come from Murray, Chatsworth, and Central who participate in our dual language program. So the problem, in some ways, has been at least solved for us by the interest of Murray, Chatsworth, and Central students wanting to participate in a district-wide dual language program by freeing up classroom space at those other schools in kindergarten, because if those students were back in their home schools, we actually would have a significant problem. So and in Central, believe it or not, had a 5% increase in the enrollment over 1 year last year. So Central now, which has the most space, is starting to trend toward more students, which is creating what I would say is a universal problem across our elementary schools. So we started to look at and audit our elementary classroom space 3 years ago, knowing that if this trend continued, we needed to get creative and think about both short-term and long-term solutions to deal with the issues of space and enrollment. So just finally, I want to give you one last perspective in terms of numbers. When we were developing our budget for this school year, we predicted, based on our analytical models, that we would have 434 to 440 incoming kindergarten students. By July, we revised our forecasting and said maybe 450 to 455. On September 1st, we welcomed 471 kindergarten students, okay? And so it was well beyond what we said is our worst analysis in terms of projections. And we now are saying, what happens if this continues? A quick anecdotal story is that last spring we opened up an outdoor classroom at Murray, and I was standing next to a very nervous mom because her child was going to recite a poem in front of the entire school to dedicate this outdoor classroom space, and she was very nervous because he didn't like to speak in public. And I said, he'll do fine, don't worry. And she said to me, so who are you? And I said, well, I'm the superintendent of schools. She said, well, we're new to the school and community. We love it here. We came from Brooklyn. And I said, that's wonderful. I'm glad. And she wanted to know if I was superintendent of schools of all of Westchester. And I said, that would be wonderful, but it's hard enough just to be superintendent of 6 schools. By the end of the dedication ceremony, what was exciting is that she said to me, I just want you to know, we've told all our friends in Brooklyn, this is a great community, okay? The proximity to New York City, just the best of it in the public schools, and we love the school, and guess what? They're all coming here. So it really speaks to, in my mind, what if, right? I mean, the what ifs about what are we going to do if we continue to see a higher trend of first-time families, if we continue to see a strong interest in our public school system for the foreseeable future. And we have to deal with what I would say the multiple dimensions or challenges of enrollment, space, and resources. And so really this year, beginning in September, the board and the administration started to say we need to draw this to the public's attention, to the community's attention. We need to figure out as a community, how can we work together to figure out both short-term and long-term solutions. And so when we met in September, our first meeting, we kind of listed the possibilities, right? Because on one hand, we know that there's strong support for our delivery models, the neighborhood schools, right? How you begin the system and the convenience and the proximity to a school. And we know what that means. But at the same time, we have to be realistic to understand, especially with so many new families. And what's interesting is when we looked at our modeling around registration, in the last 3 years, in prior 3 years, I would say as far back as 6 years ago, when we look at our census, the number of children per family, the highest number was 2 kids per family. And all of a sudden, 3 years ago, that switched to 1 child per family. And the theory is that we have more first-time children of school-age children in these families that are going to be followed by kids who are yet to come into the system, right? So it really, in some ways, validates our thinking that we have a higher percentage of new families joining us, right, the last 3 years. Those families have only 1 child registered in the system, but we believe they're younger families who have multiple kids who are going to come through the system, and so we need to kind of understand what that means for our schools. So let's talk about what school systems typically do when they have the issue of growing enrollment in space. Well, one thing, you can just increase the number of kids in a classroom, right? We can just simply, the board could say, well, where we used to believe we want to be competitive regionally and have 22 to 25 students, we're going to grow that. Well, that is one sore point from the perspective of what people expect in our public school systems, but also what we would say the research suggests about what are the optimal learning experiences for students, especially when you have students with varying needs in the classroom. So that's one thing. And I would say that we are on the upper end of class sizes in Westchester. We were on the high side. It's interesting. I was doing some work in New Canaan Public Schools, and I was just struck by in New Canaan the class sizes. They were just remarkably small. And again, I think the schools are built that way, and that's something that the school system is able to support. That school system is significantly smaller than our system. The second issue, the second strategy beyond the class sizes is we can think about space and adding space. And so if you're paying attention to our board meetings, one of the things we investigated recently, both for short-term and long-term, is modular classrooms, right? Adding space temporarily that will allow us to accommodate more kids. The problem with that at the elementary level is that we have schools that are built in residential communities that have finite amount of space. It's not like New Canaan where you have rolling hills and you just add a wing or add spaces. So we are limited in our footprint, which becomes problematic. And one of the things we did understand is that adding modular classrooms, which could be a great solution, they're expensive and they take time because they go through the capital project of the Department of Education. So it would be difficult to think about it. So then there are other solutions that we can think about. One, we can redistrict the district, right? The Board of Ed has the responsibility to set the lines of signing students to schools. And one of the things that we're looking at now is, can we redistrict by moving the map, so to speak, which has been done historically over time. Some of you might say it hasn't been done in quite some time, but the reality is that is one tool in the tool belt, one option we would need to consider both for short-term and long-term. The other, I would say, more dramatic on the continuum of choices are to build additional wings, right? To build a new school, to move or rethink or think differently about our delivery model. We've talked about the opportunity, or certainly the advantage of creating an early learning center environment. So taking all of our kindergarten and first grade students, or kindergarten pre-K, and finding a space, maybe the VFW in town, just kidding, Nancy, but finding a convenient location to bring all the students together for the first time to start their learning experience. We feel that would certainly provide it. Another, I would say, strategy that predates my arrival, that has been discussed, is the Princeton plan. That is to create a K-1 school, a 2-3 school, 4-5, to have all the kids come together. There's a lot of economy or of scale in that model, because if you look at our system now, we may have a certainly higher grade level enrollment in a particular elementary school that causes us to add a classroom, whereas if you just take our class sizes by grade and you divide that by the number of total students in a grade, you'll see that there are some efficiencies when you educate kids in one place in a grade. So that's another option, and that has brought a lot of comments from residents every time I introduce the idea. But it's something that we need to look at in all seriousness. Just to give you a perspective, getting back to where we started, 650 students above what we predicted is equivalent to one additional elementary school. I mean, if you think about it, we've added the equivalent of one elementary school into our system over the last 7 years, and that's pretty dramatic. It really is. So this is not something that we can ignore from a perspective of, what keeps me up at night as I think about September 1st of next year is what happens if we run out of space in our elementary schools. That is, what happens, in a real situation if at Chatsworth and Murray there are not enough classrooms to educate our students, and how do we tell parents then that we have to relocate them somewhere else or make other decisions? So that's why we focused on this in real time in two ways. One, what do we need to consider to prepare for September 1st, which will buy us more time to think about if we continue to grow as a system, as our projections suggest, if we think we're going to be well over 6,000 students by 2021, what are the long-term strategies, conversations that we need to have with all of you to plan and prepare for in order to maintain and improve the quality of our school system? So I think you can't separate the fiscal constraints or challenges, the space limitations, and the enrollment as factors or challenges for our community and our systems that we really need to grapple with and get creative. So that's the kind of place we're at. And what we've decided as a governance team is that we really want to bring the community into this conversation. We think it's critical that we hear from the voices of those who live here and have lived here for many years who don't have children in the school system. Because it's very easy, when I talk to parents and I have superintendent's coffees, the elementary parents say, well, just build another school. Just, put up a bond, build another school. Everybody will support that. I remind everybody that about 70% of our residents are not affiliated with our school system. That this is really a community-wide decision, not simply just to say, let's focus on our children in the public schools. So we are committed to forming a task force to look at long-term strategies to address growing enrollment. Now, the reason I say a task force in long-term is because we may see a change in this trajectory. We may, by giving ourselves a little bit of time, start to see a slowdown in kindergarten enrollment that in many respects will buy us more time. The problem from where I stand or sit is that I just can't wish and hope and think that that will happen. That the last 3 years of enrollment has really said to us that this is not just an anomaly. This is not a bleep or a spike in enrollment. This is starting to be a reality. And so success in many respects brings success and challenges, and this is certainly a challenge that we face. So I want to say at the same time it's an opportunity. So where we are in tonight and then in January, we're going to start to form the structure and invite people to be a part of this task force to really investigate and become experts in various strategies to come forward over time. It also, in my mind, parallel to this, creates a great opportunity which I think we can't ignore. And that is to step back and really prioritize what I would say is the vision of our public school system for the next 15 years to 20 years. Many of you know that the world is changing dramatically, right? It's complex. It's the world economy. When we think about jobs of the future, we think about the skills, the dispositions, the knowledge that students will need for jobs that we don't yet know about. It's hard to think that this, what I would say, is the industrial model of schooling, what we know, right? The Carnegie units, the issues of time and schedule, space, how we group students, how we schedule students, how we introduce content is going to help students in a world that's going to be vastly different going forward. So I really believe that this is a watershed or a critical moment to really kind of, in some ways, take off the Band-Aid, so to speak, to really think it broadly about what do we want to become as a school system to help prepare students for the future? What should that look like? And then how does what I would say the bricks and the mortar, how does the way we organize school, how does the delivery model in terms of grouping and using space and learning come together? And how can we think about that in a way that positions the district for the future instead of just dealing with what I would say the system challenges that I just suggested that can be dealt with in the ways that we always deal with them. So we have been working, many of our administrators have been working with Heidi Hayes Jacobs from Teachers College, who wrote a book called Bold Moves, and it's an interesting study. So Heidi Hayes Jacobs is a national renowned curriculum person. She's always looked at pedagogy and curriculum. And a couple of years ago, she decided to basically take a tour of the world. That is to go to schools, go to public schools, ministry schools, go to for-profit schools, go to charter schools, go across the globe to say, what's changing in terms of going away from what I would say is the industrial model of schooling to think about the future of schools and future of learners who are very different from who we were as learners as well. So looking at the issue of technology, looking at the issue of physical space, looking at how we group students, looking at content and what we want students to learn. And she wrote a book called Bold Moves, and many of our, actually 6 of our building administrators have been meeting quarterly with her as part of a regional consortium to start to imagine how schools could look different by looking and thinking about some bold moves. And let me give you an example that I think in my mind speaks to this issue that takes us away from a conventional solution that may, in some ways, be a creative solution that solves a lot of things that we're facing. So imagine coming to Murray Avenue School, okay? And imagine being a 3rd grade student and having a backpack, or in this case, because everything comes online, you don't necessarily need to bring a heavy backpack and books, because when you get to school, everything you have is available to you when you take out your Chromebook or your iPad or your even phone to work. But you walk into school, and instead of going to Miss Smith's classroom with your 23.5 additional students, okay, you go to a place where you hang up your coat, and then you go to a very large instructional space, okay? You go to a space that is as big as the diner, so to speak. And instead of having one teacher who's going to be with you for pretty much half the day until you go to art or music and so on, you're actually in a room with 100 or 200 kids with about 9 adults, 9 or 10 or educators. And instead of being in a row of classrooms, you're sitting with maybe 10 or 12 students who were not necessarily in your class historically, but are right at the right moment of where you are with mathematics instruction. And the person who you're dealing with today is going to have you go deeper in terms of learning the concept of, let's say, area, okay? Or how to divide fractions, or what is proportions and something like that. And there are 7 other 8 groups of students, or 9 or 10 in this area who's working differently, maybe with 2 teachers, maybe with, and so on. And you spend time there, and then an hour later, you actually go off into a smaller area where you do something else. In other words, this idea of everything is like it's been, right? That we deliver instruction by one teacher with 22 or 23.5 students, or 24, because that's our averages. That the idea of this industrial model is antiquated. It's okay, it's different. And also what we want students to know and demonstrate their knowing, their learning, looks different, and how they apply and do that. So I introduced to you that the opportunity that we have in looking at some of our challenges is to start to reimagine what schooling should be, what learning could look like, and then how the variables of time, the variable of space, the variable of certainly groupings, and all that comes together to in some ways, imagine what we want for students and how they learn. And so I don't want to lose the opportunity as we invite you into our conversation about growing enrollment, adding buildings, moving students, to ignore what I think is the most pressing issue. How do we continue to reinvent and remain a vibrant, rich public school systems that attracts families to our community to get at the very essence of what we want to offer? Opportunity to learn, opportunity to apply that learning in authentic experiences, to build a set of skills that's going to enable them to be successful in the world and the economy and the jobs that have come to us in the future. 5 years ago, we had no computer science in our schools. Today, 15% of our high school students are enrolled in computer science. Last May, our underwater high school robotics team took on MIT up in Cape Cod in an underwater robotics challenge. We have the richness of Sheldrake and the sound. We have so many opportunities here. We have restaurants and we have a culinary program of kids who want to be entrepreneurs. We are positioned well as a community to support what I would call education 2.0, right? This idea of reinventing and preparing for the future. And what's happening from a federal level and what may happen over the next 40 hours in terms of tax bills and the disassembling of what do I think of the state level commitment to education reminds me that we need to drive the train, okay? We need to really protect our future by our own vision of what's possible and not in some ways respond or react to the limitations that are coming down the pike if things continue. And so I think, what I've said to the board, and I really believe this, that we are at a watershed moment around this idea of public education, that right now the marketplace has changed. There are, as I said, for-profit schools, there are parochial and private schools, there are charter schools. There are people who say, I'm going to homeschool my child and have someone teach my child physics through technology in India, right? I mean, you have, right now, if I wanted to hire a teacher to teach my child at home, physics, I can contract with someone, I can Skype with them, and every day I can wake up, feed them breakfast, and my child can learn physics. We aren't the only place in town relative to educating students. So I believe we need to continue to strengthen our program. We need to be forward-thinking in how we think about school. We need to become valuable so that people say, I want to move to Larchmont Mamaroneck so that I can access the school. I want to be a part of this school system and support it because it offers my child, our children, the greatest opportunity for learning, for thinking, for doing that will lie ahead. And so for me, it's an exciting time. As much as I do think about what happens if we have one more child at Murray on September 1st. I do think we need to move beyond the immediate. We need to kind of think big, so to speak, and be logical in bringing the community together to offer solutions that are not just limited to brick and mortar, to fiscal resources or asking more. It's going to take a huge commitment in what I would say is our professionals, our unions, to think differently about what's possible. I think of, if you remember the Jonathan, I think, it's Jonathan Bach, the book Illusions, who wrote Jonathan Living Seagull, Sebastian. Okay, it starts out where there's a group of people holding onto a rock in a stream, and everybody's afraid to let go because they don't know what's down the stream. And in many respects, we hold on to this public education model because it's what we know, we feel comfortable with, and we want to protect. And at some point, you have to say, unless we start to reimagine, rethink, and kind of redesign, what's going to be left, right? So I would rather be proactive and invest in creative thinking with all of you than to kind of just protect and hold on to what we've had, because we can always get better. We can always do things differently. And there's so many opportunities in terms of how we learn, how we want students to learn, the expertise we have in this room, and the careers and experiences of people in our community that really are certainly important to what it means to be an educated citizen in our community. One last tidbit, because I always have to kind of, in some ways, use a public opportunity to highlight what we do. On Tuesdays, I think Thursday mornings at Joe Liberty's civic research class, you'll see 33 ninth grade students poring over state census data to really try and understand who participates on a local level in elections and referendums. And we were I think forward-thinking based on the success of Joe's AP government experience to go to New Hampshire and learn retail politics. And certainly our original science research four-year course where students are working side by side with a professional researcher to say, how do we engage students in the responsibility of being a citizen in a democracy and understand civic responsibility? And so we launched, Joe came up with a wonderful idea of launching a 4-year original civics research class where students are going to understand what does civic engagement mean. They're going to become an expert on a local issue, something that's, something important to them and their community. And they're going to learn how to go through what I would say is the steps of advocating through civic responsibility to see a solution being put forth that will add to the quality of life here locally. And in my mind, that in some ways is a great example of where we want to go as a school system. Because I know that when you work in a lab with a researcher, when you go and participate in a primary with an elected, someone who wants to be an elected official, when you engage in solving a local problem, you gain a knowledge base, a disposition, and a skill set that is going to give you as a student a clear advantage in this world and will add to your understanding of how the world can be and works. And that's the public school system we want to put forth. And that's the community that we want to build here in our community. So with that, I will say a couple things. We certainly want to have you participate, have the opportunity. In many respects, I see this group as thought leaders. I was excited by the opportunity to come to speak to you because I do think having a sit down separately to talk about creative solutions about these challenges that are in some ways removed from the normal just raise class sizes, build a wing, move the kids, that we want to start, I'd say, is a broader discussion about what do we want for our public school system in this community for the future. So that's what it's at. So with that, I don't know if I've used up too much time, not enough time. I hope you now understand from a numbers perspective what we're facing relative to growing enrollment. I want you to know that people say, well, why don't you just hire an expert to do your forecasting? It's interesting. The Board of Education in 2010 spent $15,000 on a demographic study, and what we found is after a year, you can kind of put that away somewhere, that our ability to actually use our analytic programs, both for redistricting, we have a geocoded map. We know where all of you live. We know where all our students live, and we have the ability in real time to move a street over here to this school and know what the impact's going to be. Similarly, our analytic model, we can make projections about using ratio of live births to cohort survival. We can do predictions and change that, move things. So we have the capacity to kind of understand what's in front of us. What I think we really need is a consensus and interest of where we're going forward. Questions?
Before you take questions.
Sure.
Thank you. I think we're all going to spend a little while wrapping our minds around all the things you've just offered us. We're going to try out a new system today because we always have trouble making sound enough from the audience for LMC-TV to pick up and then for people in the room to hear. So we actually have a handheld mic, I think, that Lynette is going to bring to the people who ask questions, and then Dr. Schatz will answer the questions. So with that, I'm just going to hand you back the mic. And Lynette's got the handheld. And does anybody have a question? Yes, please.
Sorry.
Lynette, this gentleman right here.
Oh, you got it, Lynn?
Second. Right.
I'm from a very different era. My children were involved in the earlier exchange of students from Murray to Mamaroneck Avenue, which started a lot of other conversations in the area. And I'm very impressed and encouraged by what you're talking about in terms of changes in schools. It's unfortunately, this area tends to be a little slow in this. Some of what you're talking about is being done in places like Texas and Florida. Not well, but done. But I just want to hope that you will separate the problems in the sense that if the student body does not grow, and I do demography for school districts, so I know how this goes, you don't lose sight of the more important changes that you're talking about, which should take place even if we're down to 3,000 students instead of up to 7,000. So,
And I appreciate that. I think that's why, if everybody heard the question, is in other words, don't ignore the fact that if this is a course correction, the broader, what I would say, opportunity to reinvent schools, to think differently, and I appreciate that. And that's why, in some ways, these are coupled. One is, I think the vision has to drive the question of space and enrollment, not vice versa. And that's why I want to make sure that we maybe have to slow down a little bit, that we need to really bring people in to talk about a new vision before we deal with space and enrollment. And that's why I'm hoping that separating out this as short-term, long-term, that we look for September to say, can we get through September to buy more time to have a lengthy conversation about really the next 2 to 10 years. So thank you.
the other brick and mortar solution.
Yes.
Which is possible. Maybe if you can find space for it. But in an area like Mamaroneck, you're talking about $70 million. We built schools for $2 million when I was doing it. It's now 70.
I want to say that I do think, it's interesting, the dual language program, if you're not familiar, we have a K-5 Spanish-English dual language program that has attracted a lot of attention. And what's interesting is that organically, without thinking about redistricting, many parents from Chatsworth, Murray have said, because the program is housed at MAS, I am more interested in having my child participate in the program, so I'm willing to kind of give up my neighborhood schools to go to have this kind of experience. That in itself, has kind of provide evidence that keeping the neighborhood schools is the only thing that people want. The opportunity is, if you think about with 4 elementary schools or spaces at brick and mortar, if we had what I would say is a project-based elementary school, if we had a Chinese, English dual language schools, if we had what I would say is a STEM school as an elementary, people could choose. That's another way of thinking about how educational vision program drives enrollment, not, again, just about enrollment.
Thank you. Very impressed. I am really thrilled to hear you thinking beyond the walls. And as the gentleman just said earlier, the solutions that you're talking about, which have been implemented in many different parts of the country, are worth looking at, and among other things, will save our children from a lousy teacher. One child locked in for 5 hours every day with a lousy teacher is a big problem. And your solution to me, who had a child locked up in 6th grade with one lousy teacher, is like fantastic. On the cost side, I think that the tax law that is about to be implemented has really changed the economics. It is going to really affect the attractiveness of Larchmont, Mamaroneck, and every other place. Those people who will leave Brooklyn to come to Westchester, specifically to our community, which is now one of the highest tax in Westchester, suddenly means that the cost of schooling has changed for them. And the Brooklyn private school is no longer as unaffordable as it had been this month. So I urge you to give consideration to the impact of the new tax bill on the migration of families to Westchester.
So
The studies that I've been reading about the last couple of months are a real indication of the impact that could be. People have focused on cost, but that's not the issue. The issue is that suddenly the comparison has shifted. So that could really affect migration. But I want to close my remarks by really congratulating you on the way you are looking at this project. And we're lucky to have you. Thank you.
So I actually agree. we're paying a lot of attention. That's why I introduced the idea of the impact of the federal decision-making and what is heading forward. And I agree, we need to have a clear sense of 2-3 years what may happen, and who will be responsible for holding on to the education of our students relative to the distribution of cost and paying for our school system. So I do think it's something we need to really understand before it happens and not after the fact. But I do, to your point about the playing field, that's why I've felt for a very long time that it's about value, okay? And it's about value that you offer as an institution and a community in order to attract people to want to come. Because when there are choices and people are now making decisions about options, we can't assume that people are going to continue to come here because they always did before. That we need to have a reason to attract, and that is quality of our school system. I think what I appreciate, one of the reasons why I love being in the community in the role of superintendent, is this community has for years, for decades, invested in a strong public school system. They understand the relationship between quality education, property values, quality of life, opportunity for children. And we want to make sure that we are forward-thinking and understanding that everything that we believe will hit us, that we will be in some ways reacting to, that we are in some ways proactive and not reactive to this. So thank you.
Thanks. Richard Ward, former Larchmont trustee. 15 years ago, a topic of conversation one would read about in the paper was the French-American school looking to expand, build a high school. In 2007, when I was elected, I went to the school and I said, you know, you're not voters, you are a constituency, you're our biggest foreign investor in Larchmont. 10% of the houses in Larchmont are occupied by French-speaking people who do not send their kids to public school. You know, what are your needs? And the response I got was interesting. They said, you're the only elected official or official from local government who's ever come to see us. So the point is, as they relocate to other areas, those houses are being occupied by people who will not pay any more tax, but will send their kids to public school. So I would urge you to look at not just the French-American school, but all the different programs and what their plans are and how they interact with the school districts, so that that may help to develop this sense of, you know, predictive enrollments. And then I have a second point.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, the second one is, as we know, the lines have been moved before, but as people have to travel further to take their kids to elementary school, or you know, there's massive traffic problems, which is a local government problem, really, and a negative economic impact, as I see it, on the community. And there's really little alternative to that now. You can walk or you can be driven to school. It's not safe to bike down Palmer Avenue from Larchmont to the middle school or to the high school. So I would also encourage you to look at transportation solutions as part of this: busing, biking, things that need to be addressed.
Well,
sidewalk safety.
So I appreciate a couple points. One, I think I wanted to point out when I started to talk about, so what's caused this spike in enrollment or growing enrollment? One of the interesting things is that even without what I would say is the new development coming online, because there are about 250 units that are in progress or process that concern us, because when we look at and we start to kind of actually see from a census how many students are coming from Cambion, how many students may come for the new projects, that's one element that needs to be discussed. And I have a meeting coming up with our current municipal leaders to talk about this idea of continual building and growth and potential impact on the schools, and what we'd like to talk about relative to who's paying the cost of ultimately of more families and kids enrolling in the schools, and the pressure on accommodating those students through development, right? And what creative solutions can there be? Second of all, I think we do pay attention because we know that about 10% of school-aged children attend private parochial schools who live in the community, and that's been a fairly constant number. So when the board approved recommendations for some changes to our transportation policies, everybody said, well, you're going to see a large segment of private school students coming back into the public schools, which is going to create enrollment problems. That really hasn't happened. That policy change did not directly relate to more kids coming in, and people make decisions about school beyond just transportation. But to your last point, we've been fortunate to have great representation in Albany. Steve Otis is here, who worked closely with Nancy Segleson and other leaders to create a safety zone here on Post Road in front of the high school, a school where kids, we know we have a lot of traffic, and I think working with Safe Routes to Schools, we do want to create opportunities for children to ride bikes. We have more bike racks now at our high school and middle school than we've had in the last 10 years to create those opportunities to deal with the traffic issue. The great news about our mapping software is that it really allows us to move a street and see what the impact's going to be. It allows us to overlay transportation policies, and so when we know with our outlier families, if they go and reassign, what that would relate to in terms of busing. So it is a very sophisticated model, but all those factors need to be considered. Absolutely. I know you had a question.
Hi, I'm Theodora Saul. I'm an attorney, but I also have 2 kids in the high school. We came up through MAS, which was great. So my sister's kids go to the best school in the world, which is called DTEC. Are you familiar with DTEC? DTEC is on the Oracle campus. And he actually doesn't live in the same town, but there are kids from the whole Bay Area that are brought to DTEC, and it is, they deal head on with any of the sort of moral economic issues of how can we make an incubator of 10th graders, and now Oracle take their ideas and make billions. So they do separate that, but it is built so much on the principle of cooperative learning, of open classroom, of much less structure, but finding the way, but enough discipline that it's very certainly a college prep environment, but also helping kids find what they want to do, combine it with social responsibility and some, advanced academics, and this is an incredibly beautiful building, which is a sort of concept building that goes along the school. Can I turn this off because I have a loud voice? And they get a lot of money from Bill and Melinda in the Next Gen program. There's a lot of grant money.
So let me just say, first of all, I don't know the school, but we have been to High Tech High, which is out of San Diego, which is a very similar school model where it really is started with the idea of entrepreneurship, authentic learning, high tech. How do we kind of build the next generation of Silicon Valley leaders and so on. One thing I'll say, it's always easier because I had the experience in New Hampshire to create a new school, right? To start from scratch. So if someone said to me today, Dr. Schaps, we want you to start a new school system, I'd say, great, okay? Because we could design it from the beginning. We could free ourselves from what I would say is Albany and all the testing requirements and stuff. We can kind of create our own idea of how, again, some of the things I talked about, how we group students, how we use time, etc., how we build space, and so on. So we want to harness that DTEC mentality, right? The idea of who are our students, what are they going to be asked to do in the future, how do we create the foundation that gives them opportunity to discover their passion, to have a balance between core content and creativity. I would say that one of the incredible strengths of our school system is our music program. I mean, if you think about, if you're a part of an ensemble, a strings ensemble that is not guided by a teacher, you have to get along with 3 or 4 other people, okay? You have to work in unison with them. You need to know your part. You need to know timing. You need to kind of blend in. There are so many things that come out of being part of an ensemble that has value, that I would say is universal to what we want kids to have for the rest of their lives. So, you know, we started a capstone project at grade 5 in middle school. It's a year-long or half-year discovery about asking important questions about something that you're interested in, becoming an expert, and then presenting what you know to the public. That kind of learning is invaluable, okay? Because first of all, kids in 5th grade, they ask the darndest questions, okay? You walk into Central School and you walk into the hallway and see a 5th grade student say, is any aspect of insider trading okay, right? Okay, you know, so we know what's in that mind of that student, but the important thing is an inquiry project, okay? An inquiry project, going deep into inquiry to look for evidence, to be able to use the inquiry model, and then to communicate, whether in various modalities, whether it's through video, whether through its presentation, whether it's through artwork or models. That's the kind of learning we want for our kids. And so some of this stuff is already happening, and we just need to say, how do we go deeper and get what we want? And so I would say to you is we are looking at those types of new learning opportunities. What I get concerned is because I had the opportunity to go, and I'm part of the Carnegie Foundation to rethink doctoral programs for graduate students, administrators for kindergarten, public school systems. And I was at Carnegie Foundation, and High Tech High, which is nationally known now for their model, like DTech, was there. And I was listening to the struggles they have about core content. So all their kids are great programmers, but they don't have the time to focus on humanities, and they have weak humanities. And I'm saying, well, if you know something, but you can't communicate it, how good is that, right? So it's figuring out the balance between innovation, entrepreneurship, but being able to have a strong foundation in content that still carries through. And they're not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. We just need to figure it out. But that's the kind of thinking that we want to have people participate in and be a part of.
I just want to say that I think that the more creative or forward-thinking you're thinking, I think you should expect quite a bit of pushback, which would seem surprising, but there's a lot of people who are in favor of this model because this model is more likely to get you into Princeton, they think. And I just want to let you know that. And my son is in OCRA, and he loves it. And he can't wait to get up early, leave for school at 20 to 7. He loves it. So it's a wonderful program.
For a high school student who want to get up early, that's a wonderful thing. I actually think that our most intriguing programs, when our students win the Westchester County App Design Competition, when our students design an app for Alzheimer's and go to Burke Rehabilitation, they see the connection between what they do in the classroom and the application of that in the real world. And so that's why I Sheldrake, I bring it up, or even our local government, having the opportunity to rub elbows with people, professionals who do important work, has such value to our children. Our senior internship for our high school students that we want all kids to participate in, going to Sarah Newman and working, going into a classroom, going to a restaurant, you broaden their sense of place, of purpose, of opportunity. I still think that passion is the most important thing that we can kind of foster or light for our students in education. And so finding opportunities to figure out your passion. I also believe clearly, and this is, I apologize for espousing my belief system, but I do believe that careers, this idea of career is going to, and it already has become so different from what we all know, that people are going to have to show the value they offer, show the skill set they have, and that the career arc is going to change, I would say, every 3, 4, 5 years. This idea of working for a company for life is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And so how do we help students really, what I think are not soft skills, but inner resilience, resilience, okay, grit and determination, social emotional well-being, the ability to communicate with someone who speaks a different language from across the country, or the world, excuse me, and not get frustrated because you're having issues around, language or culture, things like that. That there are social emotional skill sets that we have to focus on, as well as the academics, to really support our kids going forward. I really, truly believe that. That's why we've come around so much back to social emotional well-being and idea of cooperation, of collaboration, all the big C words that we think start with your ability to get along in a social world.
We have about 5 more minutes, I say. So
Oh, I thought we were just getting started.
I know, maybe one more.
I'm kidding.
Dr. Shaps, thank you for your presentation. History has a tendency to repeat itself. And if the gentleman over there remembered 1968, it was very contentious, wasn't it? Okay, when we talked about 600 students at Murray Avenue School, and poor Bernie Hake, who was our superintendent, made this decision to say, let's move our kids to different districts. And it really went crazy.
I was the one from Mamaroneck Avenue.
Thank you.
We did not mind having...
Thank you. Thank you. And if you remember, the only thing that calmed it down was the assassination of Dr. King, because that particular day was the day that Murray Avenue was going to raise hell on the Board of Education. But Dr. King was unfortunately assassinated that year. But out of that came co-op camp. Out of that came Actionville. Out of that came a whole different design. And sorry for D-Tech, but I came from Mamaroneck Avenue School, and from a family that my mother was 4th grade, my father was 8th grade. We didn't do too bad. So I think Mamaroneck was the best school district that ever existed. So in saying that, you're caught between a rock and a hard place, because you keep saying community. These are 3 communities: Larchmont, Town of Mamaroneck, Village of Mamaroneck. It's not homogeneic in terms of some of the references that you use, i.e. Scarsdale, Chappaqua, Byram Hills, Armonk. We're very heterogenetic. And in terms of some of the, what you say, research, I wish that, as Dr. Sobel said when he was superintendent of Scarsdale, he looked at Mamaroneck, and when he became chancellor of state ed, said, if anybody want to look at a school district, look at Mamaroneck, because it's 3 townships, 1 school district. We do have an overpopulation, but we also have some vacant schools. And we talk about the French American School. Well, the French American School won their decision. They might move all their kids up to White Plains. So where's St. Aug in Larchmont? Where's Holy Trinity in Mamaroneck? St. John. So we do have what's called a space issue that might be resolved in terms of the overbulging of that. So if it can be investigated. Also, in regard to some of the, I guess, state mandated, non-mandated, let's keep a balance in terms of not Murray Avenue, envisioning Murray Avenue with all the kids, because there's technology in the homes of Murray Avenue that's far advanced than the school. But let's look at Mamaroneck Avenue School that might not have the Chromebook, or even though we will eventually have it, but all those kids don't have that access, Dr. Shapp. So if we keep a balance, I believe the district as a whole will benefit. The district as a whole. Thank you.
So thank you, Keith. And I just want to respond in a couple of ways. One, I do believe that diversity is the strength of this community, that we are surrounded by very different communities, and we are not similar in many respects, and that is a strength. I do also believe that there is opportunity to look at space, and that's why when we talk about the advantage of, for example, creating a K-1 early learning center, of having all our kids together right from the start, and the opportunity that could solve many issues. So if you think about it, we have about 6 sections at each of, or anywhere from 4 to 6 kindergarten sections at every elementary school. If you pulled out those students, and even 1st grade students, and started them in one place, or grew into that, you free up classroom space for 1st or through 5th grade, for 2nd through 5th, and you in some ways create a solution that can maintain itself because you have a lot more space. But you're also bringing kids together and starting to form an identity as one system right from the get-go. So we are looking at that overall. I think the other thing I just want to point out is that equity of opportunity to learn is something that is near and dear to my heart professionally and personally. We never think about an initiative that without understanding resources outside of school. So when we launched a one-to-one initiative at the high school, we weren't necessarily concerned about a student who lives in Larchmont about access to technology. We wanted to make sure that if we said we want all of our students to have a device, that there was a device available to every student if we had to provide it for them to ensure equity of opportunity to learn. Just as we're going to the public library and places to say that there were internet connection, not thinking that every home had access to the internet. And so you can give a child a Chromebook, but they bring it home and they can't use it. And so we are always thinking about equity as in terms of demands on learning, but also equity from our belief of what kids should be able to accomplish as well. And I think, as the board knows, we started the Mamaroneck Scholars Program for students in poverty to make sure they have access to rigor classes at the high school. We are 22 seniors now will sit for, these are first-time college students with about 72 AP exams as juniors and seniors. Many of these students are applying as Queensbridge scholars to get a full ride to schools, and we've changed and transformed their life trajectory. And so we are thinking about equity of opportunity. We are thinking about each and every child. And the last thing I'll say is that one big idea that we really want to pay attention in terms of redesign is personalization of learning. That learning now is personalized, and we need to think about where kids are at each day and understand what they need to get them, all kids, to what I would say the finish line. So you're going to hear more about this idea of personalized learning and how that takes shape, because we have students who are ready to go to the moon, and we don't want to hold them back. At the same time, more students need support or in between. And so how do you balance that out as well?
Last question.
Thank you, Doctor. Just a quick comment that the French-American School is not leaving. They are committed to keeping the school that is the old St. Augustine's parochial school for preschool, nursery school, and that has been said to me when I was in office directly from the head of school. They're committed to staying in the area. Secondly, Doctor, you mentioned something about a task force. Can you tell us what the status of that is? Can people apply? What is it already in place, and what's the time frame?
So tonight we're going to just kind of update the community at the board meeting just about process. And I think we formed a subcommittee of the Board of Education to kind of start to put some stakes in the ground around numbers and process. I think realistically, we're going to use the month of January to really kind of publicize what this will look like. It is a long-term commitment. In other words, this is too important to rush or feel the pressure that we need to come up with the answers immediately. So we're looking for people to commit to a period of time. We need to have a good cross-section of the community. We don't want to, we think about, we had a facilities use task force and tried to look at the number of people who would be involved, because we envision really kind of dividing and conquering, to really asking the group to focus on the broader idea of educational vision, but then really become and investigate various strategies over time. So I don't want to say it'll be 10, I don't want to say it'll be 50. I will say that we are trying to figure out how do we get enough what I would say is participation to represent the community at large. How do we make sure that the task force can operate effectively and efficiently? And then what is the work that needs to be accomplished, and how many people can do that work? So I'm not punting, but I'm saying stay tuned. This is a way to keep you interested.
I want to thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. I want to thank you for a very enlightening presentation. I want to wish everybody a happy last day of Hanukkah and a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I hope to see you in the next year on January 16th, when George Latimer, our new county exec, will make a presentation about what his vision is for the county and how it may affect all of us. Thank you all, and have a very happy holiday season.
Thank you.